If you have not gone on yet and rated the pod, subscribed to the pod, and shared it with your friends, if you could do that post-haste, that would just be awesome. As you know, I do feel strongly that we should have it at the beginning of every episode somewhere.
And I feel strongly that we shouldn't have it at the beginning because it feels like pandering.
Everybody does it there.
Well, everybody does a lot of stuff. If people jumped off a cliff, Scott, would you jump off with them?
That would depend on the height of the cliff and what's at the bottom.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Let's Pod This. My name is Andy Moore. I'm one of your hosts.
And I'm Scott Nelson. I'm your other host.
Great. And today on the podcast, there's a big day at the state capitol, and really we're just going to kind of commiserate about what didn't happen there today and try to bring you up to date. At some point, I think, Scott, we'll get back to some education and talking about other issues, but being as today is, by my count, day 167 of Budget Watch 2017, this really is the pressing issue.
I mean, it's just horribly frustrating. You know, we've been in special session now for 5 weeks. We've spent, close to $1 million on extra monies that we literally don't have because we already have a $215 million budget hole. Today looked like it was going to be the day where there might be some movement. And then it just wasn't. The measure failed, and we're literally at the same place that we started.
Right. So yeah, that's the end of the story. Is that the big budget bill, the compromise bill, the what's the other term?
The grand bargain.
Grand bargain. That's right. That bill failed. That's really the end of the story.
The bill that, despite that name, was arguably neither grand nor a bargain.
No, and so maybe that's the way to do this, is to start at the end and then work our way back. And the end point is it failed, but it failed by 5 votes, 6 votes.
Yeah.
Really, yeah, 76. But
no, it was 71-27 was the final.
Was it 71? Okay,
yeah.
I thought it was still 70. So
yeah,
so it
I think Martinez switched right at the end.
Oh, right, that's right. So it failed by 5 votes. We were literally 5 votes down, which we both said is literally a West Wing episode.
A particularly good West Wing episode.
It is, and we would watch that tomorrow night for our West Wing watch party at the Wheeler District, but we won't.
Because Shibboleth is better and less depressing.
Right, because I think we need some hope, and I will be tweeting that here shortly.
God, Shibboleth is such a good episode.
It's a great episode. It's the Thanksgiving Day episode, and by the time both of our listeners hear this podcast, it will already have been passed, and they won't care anyway. So,
although, if anyone knows Rishikesh Shirway or Josh Molina and could get them to come on the pod for us, I would just, God, that would be awesome.
I have my my brown corduroy sport coat in the car with my West Wing Weekly lapel pin already on it, because the lapel pin is official from the podcast, and as we know, brown corduroy sport coats are the official sport coat of Let's Fix This.
That's true. We all have one, and we all wear it any chance we get.
You have one too, don't you?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
I have both corduroy and tweed.
Ooh, I do love some tweed.
I mean,
the Brits know their fashion, not so much their dental hygiene. All right, so back to the vote. So the vote failed by 5 votes on this big measure, and this was the tobacco fee, cigarette. It was a cigarette fee, and there's some what do they call them, like small cigars or something?
Yeah.
And
cigarillo.
Ooh. Was there also some smokeless tobacco in there? I read.
I think so.
Anyway,
alcohol.
So yeah, basically smokes, booze, and fuel. So those were the 3 ways we were getting revenue. We were also spending more money on a teacher pay raise.
Did you mention the gross production tax increase?
Oh, and the GPT. Yes, how could I forget the most contentious part of the bill? So cigarettes, 3-2 beer, fuel, gross production tax is how we were getting money in this revenue bill, and then it was going to have a trailing bill for us to give a pay raise to teachers and a pay raise to public employees. That trailing bill obviously was not heard because the first bill with the revenue didn't pass today. So this is the bill that stalled out in House JCAB last week, I guess. The Senate passed it this week, sent it to the House and said, hey, we passed it overwhelmingly. You should vote for it too. but they didn't.
So this is interesting. If you find this kind of mundane legislative shop talk interesting, which you are listening to the pod, so probably you do. What happened is there was a bill that passed in the House last week that did not include a gross production tax increase, right? So it had cigarette tax, it had tobacco tax increase, it had the fuel tax, it had the alcohol tax, and that passed the House, but it passed the House with only 54 votes. So when a revenue measure in Oklahoma passes the House of Representatives without a 76 vote, without 76 ayes, it goes to the Senate, okay, and it also goes to the vote of the people. So this is a result of State Question 640, which you've heard us talk about many times on the pod, that says revenue measures have to have a 3/4 vote of the legislature, and all revenue bills have to originate in the House. So this was a revenue bill that passed the House because it got more than 51, but it did not reach the 3/4 threshold to actually go and become law. So the Senate took this bill up, and the Senate, it was actually, again, it was kind of interesting if you follow this stuff and find it, the kind of the political intrigue or palace intrigue of what happens at the Capitol. If you find that at all interesting,
palace intrigue, a bit of an overstatement.
You like that crumbling palace intrigue. So what had happened is that earlier this week, Speaker McCall, leader of the House of Representatives, held a press conference in which he excoriated the Senate for failing to pass any of the revenue measures that had passed the House. And these are things like basically rainy day funds that had been appropriated, carryover funds that had been appropriated, reappropriating some revolving funds, not true revenue measures, but spending bills that filled about 70% of the budget hole. The Senate had yet to hear any of those. And Speaker McCall held a press conference where he just excoriated Senate leadership, saying, I don't understand why they haven't taken up any of these things, and the House has filled 70% of the budget hold. And about 45 minutes after that press conference, Senate leadership said, Mr. Speaker, we see you, and we will raise you. So they took up this bill, this revenue bill that had passed the House with 54 votes. They amended Senate rules when they brought it to the floor. They amended the bill itself by adding a 4% gross production tax to all new wells, quickly passed it, sent it back to the House and said, hey guys, your move. The House JCAB committee heard the bill yesterday, passed it out of JCAB, and it came to the floor today for a vote.
Yeah. And, I was talking to some people yesterday, and we almost thought that the Senate might gavel in today and then adjourn entirely, thereby kind of forcing the House's hand of like, listen, we're not going to hear your stuff. We're out past that, and we're done. And I think that might have been part of the reason why the House decided to hear a different bill on the floor today, because that meant that the Senate would have to hear it, and so it kind of kept them still in the building.
Yeah, I'd heard that as well. The other reason, just so everybody, in case you don't follow this obsessively on Twitter, what ultimately happened is, from a technical perspective, the House did not hear the Senate bill, okay? They heard a different bill, which was identical to the Senate bill, but it's a bill that had originated in the House and had failed to get out of committee because it tied 11-11 in JCAB.
Right.
The reason that they did that is because they wanted to avoid any possible constitutional concerns, because revenue bills must start in the House. And so there was a concern that since the Senate had amended the bill that they passed, if it was passed by the House, it would be subject to a constitutional challenge. So the House heard a different bill in name, but identical in substance.
Right.
They passed that from JCAB yesterday and brought it to the floor today.
It's a great example that the Schoolhouse Rock video of how a bill becomes a law is super simplistic and does not necessarily apply to what happens at the state level. I talked about this last night at our Gearing Up for 2018 event with Women Lead and Oklahoma Watch, that when it gets down to this point, like, all the rules go out the window and we're just making it up as we go along, and like anything can be like amended, or inject it into a bill, and they'll do House amendments. So suddenly the bill just like it went from a shell bill with no language to an actual bill with language, and then we change that language. And this conference committee and both chambers can get together and change wording, and then poof, it gets passed, and they go home, and our heads are spinning.
Yeah. This is one reason. So talking, we had an opportunity over the past weekend to talk with some folks that they're not themselves legislators, but they are very involved with some of these processes as advocates and lobbyists, and they've been around the Capitol once or twice. And it's interesting. They said, and I heard this from two people actually. I asked them, like, what do you guys think is the problem? Like, why aren't we getting anything done? And both of these guys said the same thing. They said, in their view, the problem is term limits. I think that a lot of us tend to look at term limits as a very good thing, right? It prevents people from becoming career politicians and career public servants, where they, kind of gets rid of the person that goes to the Capitol and, sits there as a fat cat for the rest of their days. But it also kind of ignores the fact that term limits ignore the fact that government is complicated, right? It's complicated. The levers of government are complicated. And what can sometimes happen is in Oklahoma, when you've got a total of 12 years to serve in both houses, I mean, you can literally spend the first 6 years or more figuring out just how all this stuff works.
Right. And, so there's been a lot of discussion from people who are irritated with the speaker of like, how do we remove the speaker? And the only people that I know that have been like actually exploring that are those that have been there for 10 or 11 years, because they know where to look.
They're literally the only people that know how to do it.
And they're not even sure. Like, they're having to like research it, and it probably won't happen. It's possible, but it's only happened, I think, once before.
I mean, and that's one of the reasons when you look at Washington, which obviously, at the federal level, legislators don't have any term limits. That's one of the reasons that some of the most effective and powerful people in both the House of Representatives and particularly in the Senate are the guys that have been there. And I say guys intentionally because it is almost exclusively men, with the exception of Barbara Boxer and Dianne Feinstein of California, to a lesser extent Susan Collins of Maine. The only people that know how to pull all these strings are people that have made a career out of learning.
Right. We lambast career politicians, but we celebrate career everything else. And I get why, but I think there is something to be said for people who are knowledgeable and skilled at what they do. We just tend to associate that with kind of bad stuff when it comes to politics.
Right. Well, I mean, if you're talking about the federal level specifically, right? Look at the House Committee on Appropriations and Budget, right, where the federal budget originates. Would you put somebody with no experience at running a company in charge of ExxonMobil, right? Would you put someone with no experience at executive experience running a business in charge of a giant hedge fund? No, you wouldn't do that. So why do you want someone, if you have term limits at the federal level, why do you want someone who served in the House of Representatives for 6 years in charge of the A and B committee and writing a budget for a federal government with appropriations in the hundreds of billions of dollars?
Right, and I think that's part of the deal. So typically at the federal level, people who run for office, I think, are those who have been public servants for a long time, or maybe in the case of like President Obama, someone who was a constitutional law attorney and pretty knowledgeable, and that can be one path to that. The other path is just showing up and getting elected. You could be a rancher or a farmer or someone who makes boots or whatever, a doctor. There's lots of ways to get there.
An LPC?
Yes, a licensed professional counselor. I don't think there's many counselors in government, like in elected positions.
But how much better would government operate if there were?
I don't know. Maybe we're more inclined to listen than debate. I don't know. Maybe they need somebody.
So all that to say, this is what happened today. They brought this bill to the floor of the House of Representatives. There was about an hour of questions on the bill, I think, followed by an hour of debate as well. Really,
it was so long.
It really was. It was long. However, I have to say, I think there was very good and certainly very impassioned debate on both sides of the aisle, and not only both sides of the aisle, but people debating both for and against the bill. I heard Representative Cockcroft specifically, who is a conservative Republican who does not like tax increases, explaining that he was going to vote for the bill. And as he was making his argument in his period of debate, I mean, he listed several constituents, I think five or six constituents by name, and said, I'm voting for this bill for this person and their family, for this person and their family, and for this person and their family. But by the same token, Representative Proctor, who is a Democrat from Northeast Tulsa, who I like a lot. I have a tremendous amount of respect for Eric Proctor. He was voting against the bill, and he did the same thing. He said, look, I hear what you're saying, but I can't support this, and here's why. And it's not just kind of, theoretical, esoteric, political reasons. It's because of this person who lives across the street from me. This guy specifically who runs a barber shop around the corner, this person and their family are reasons why I don't think this is a fair bill for them. And I have to say, as someone who listens to a fair amount of debate at the Capitol and who watches, debate and, reads about the proceedings on social media, it was really the outcome, the outcome aside, it was really refreshing to hear debate today that was not, kind of focused around, my caucus can't support this, or our caucus can't do this, or, I'm philosophically against tax cuts, or I'm philosophically against this. It was very moving to hear our representatives talking about specific people that they know who are in their districts who were advocating for them to vote for or against this bill. It's the kind of debate I wish we heard more often.
I totally agree. So when I was at the Capitol today, I spoke with a legislative assistant who told me this morning she fielded a phone call from a 92-year-old woman, a constituent of one of the reps that she works with. And this constituent told her that she lives in a nursing home, that if they don't find a fix to this budget situation, her nursing home will close and she'll be homeless. And so the LA was just like, what do I do? The woman was crying and I was crying, and do I offer for her to move in with me? Like it was a really difficult phone call. I can't imagine what it's like. And that's just one call for one representative. I guarantee all 98 reps there are right now got phone calls like that.
Yeah, I mean, and we prep before we start recording. Okay, we're going to talk about this, we're going to talk about that, and that's not a story that I'd heard before this. And I'm just sitting here, like, I don't know what you say to that, right? Like, I don't know what, like, if I'm the LA who takes that phone call, if I'm that person's rep, like, I don't know what you say.
Right. I mean, what do you say? And I know that representative voted for the bill for that kind of reason. He's just, you know what? Like, it's, to me, for my constituents, it's unconscionable to vote against this. And I told a number of reps that I spoke with that I get why they might vote against. For some of them, there's a contingent of Republicans that will vote against anything, even if they could tax sin itself and they'd vote against it, which is ironic, and that's just a joke. But for those that had genuine concerns that this wasn't enough, like, I get it, but this is what's on the plate, and the clock is ticking. Today is the 8th, and we've just got literally a few more days. We've been dragging this on for 7-8 weeks now. Come on.
Oh yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, I totally get why you vote against this bill. There are so many reasons to vote against this bill. Number one, we'll believe this later, I guess. It's a shitty bill. Okay, like this is the definition of a shitty sausage bill, in my personal opinion.
Here's what I was going to say. Let's go through the bill, each of the pieces of revenue, and real quick do the pro and the con for them. So and I say just the revenue pieces because the pay raises are another bill, and the pro is people get more money when they haven't had a raise for a decade. That's easy. So cigarette tax, the reason for it is it will increase, we'll say all the tobacco. The argument for increase in tobacco tax is that it generates revenue. It brings in however much, millions of dollars. That number has changed a lot, but it's going to bring in money, and it will lower smoking rates, and Oklahoma is one of the highest smoking rates in the country. So it's good. Brings in money, reduces smoking. That's a win-win. The argument against that, of course, is that that people of lower income, poor people smoke at a higher rate than rich people do. To use general terms.
And that's just a fact. I mean, that's true in Oklahoma. It's true across the country.
Right. And so because of that, it is more of a burden. We'd be raising more tax money from people who are poor. Yes, they could quit smoking, and many of them will, but it doesn't mean that all of them will. And if all of them do, then we don't get the money anyway. So I get that it's a regressive tax because it affects disproportionate. It affects poor people disproportionately.
And that's my reason for saying, again, this component particularly is shitty, right? But as a doctor, like speaking as a physician, right, do I 100% support getting people to smoke less? Absolutely. Has it been shown repeatedly that using cigarette taxes like this, tobacco taxes, are effective at getting people to quit smoking? Yes, it's 100% effective. So as kind of if you're talking about this like as a standalone measure that Oklahoma should do, yeah, I would say, yeah, I would support that. But as a budget proposal to fill this massive hole that is here now and going forward, it doesn't do that, right?
But it gives us money in the short run, which we need, and then we can maybe come up with something else in the long run. So
yes,
so that's the pro and con for that. Next, let's do the increase on 3.2 beer. So the argument for that is beginning next year when the liquor laws change, the tax rate there won't be 3.2 beer,
right? Like it doesn't exist anymore.
And so they're just going to up the tax rate on that beer now a little ahead of time. So it'll just raise a little bit extra money for the next year or so, and then it'll disappear anyway.
Right. And so, and one thing to illustrate that. So if you're talking about the cigarette tax, so for the remainder of fiscal year 18, the cigarette tax, the $1.50 per pack would be estimated to raise $81.1 million in fiscal year 18.
And to point out, it was going to be $215 million, but it was unconstitutional, and so we've lost a bunch of months that we could have collected money.
Right. And on top of that, any revenue measure takes effect 90 days after the governor's signature. So even if it had passed today, it would be at a minimum of March 1st before they could start actually collecting money from it.
Right.
So that's
they
why
missed like 9 months of the opportunity there.
So in fiscal year 18, the cigarette tax would collect an estimated $81.1 million. In fiscal year 2019, it would collect an estimated $243.5 million. So it's about 3 times more fiscal year 19 as it is fiscal year 18, as opposed to the mixed beverage tax on Low Point beer. That's estimated to collect $10.9 million in fiscal year 18 and 14.5 in fiscal year 19. So,
but I can't believe it would even collect that much.
Right, because it's not a thing, right? Like,
right. Well, and in every state that's enacted a cigarette tax, the actual return has been much less,
significantly lower, because a lot of people quit smoking. But anyway, so that's the cigarette tax, and that's the mixed beverage tax, and then next is the fuel tax, gas and diesel.
So it'd be a 6 cents per gallon on fuel, on gasoline and diesel. The argument for that is that it's more revenue, and Oklahoma's fuel tax rate is substantially lower than all the states around us.
17 cents a gallon lower on average.
Oh, really? So even if we bumped it up by 6 cents, we'd still be 11 cents a gallon lower?
Below average.
Okay, so we're way below average, like we are many things. So this would generate some money and help bring Oklahoma up a little bit. The argument against it is that, one, 6 cents per gallon is a bigger chunk. So it's about $35 a year per average driver in Oklahoma. $35 to someone who makes $25,000 a year is a bigger chunk of change than, because it's about $3 a month, right? So $3 a month to someone who only makes, $2,000 a month is a bigger chunk of change than $3 a month to someone who makes $10,000 a month.
Right. And this doesn't hit everyone equally as well, right? Like if you live in Oklahoma City and drive 2.5 miles to work downtown and you drive a Prius, right? That's one thing. If you live in a rural town and you drive a Ford 350 and you drive 20 miles a day,
gonna pay more, right?
Yeah, that's a substantial difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
and it's one of those things I totally get. Back in the spring, we did a coffee meetup with legislators one morning, and a guy, a constituent, came who lives south of town and works in the oil business somehow. He owns kind of a trucking company, so fuel is a huge part of his business cost, and he was opposed to it back then when they were talking about it. I was like, man, I get it. He's got a vested interest. For me, not such a big deal. My car's not super efficient, but I don't own a fleet of large diesel vehicles.
Right.
So
right.
That's where everyone has a different dog in this fight.
And the next part was the drills, the increase in gross production tax to 4% after 36 months, or for a period of 36 months. So that would raise in fiscal year 18 an estimated $2.2 million. And $2.2 million with an M, okay? Not billion with a B. That's $2.2 million with an M, fiscal year 18, 13.4 fiscal year 19.
So that's like pocket change.
Yeah. And this is one of the reasons that, there were 5 Democrats that voted against the bill. Eric Proctor, in his debate, specifically cited this. That this is the definition of a regressive tax. And that's why to me, personally, I would say that the bill is a shitty bill, because you're talking about $454.8 million in fiscal year 19, 13.4 on gross production tax from oil and gas. Literally all the rest of it is from smokeless tobacco, low point beer, gas and diesel fuel tax, little cigars. That's the rest of it. And that's not to say that, like, it's not shitty because you only get $13 million from oil and gas. That's not the point that I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is that of the 454, 250 million of it is the tobacco tax, which is absolutely disproportionately on low income folks. And then the next biggest portion is 170 million from gas and diesel, which is going to folks that are lower income are going to feel that a lot more than folks that aren't.
I mean, the other deal, and I had this discussion with a former legislator on Monday, is that no one really wants to raise most of the taxes on the backs of low income Oklahomans. The problem is there's a whole bunch of Oklahomans that are low income, right? We're not a rich state.
Right.
And so if you're going to raise taxes on the populace, it's going to be on the backs of people that are low. I'm not saying it's okay. I'm just saying I was watching the feed on Channel 5 on KOCO, their Facebook feed of the debate today, because they had a more stable connection than the House feed was. And so I was watching all the hearts and angry faces and people voting and kind of watching the comments. And Facebook comments are always just a minefield to walk into and really let you kind of get your fingers on the pulse of humanity in a way that you don't anticipate. And watching people's comments about that we should just cut taxes. And I think a lot of folks, legislators included, there's a significant portion of folks that genuinely believe that there's so much corruption in state agencies that we can just cut stuff and it would solve the problem.
You're referencing Representative Kevin Calvi?
Well, God, I don't know that he's ever worked in a state agency. They don't understand, the bureaucracy sucks, and the bureaucracy is there generally as a way to be good fiscal stewards.
Right.
Obviously, that doesn't always work at every state agency, as we've seen this week at the State Department of Health.
# keep Oklahoma healthy.
That's a whole other podcast. That story is developing as we go, and it's a little concerning.
But I'll say, when I say that this is a shitty bill, a big part of that is that it is built on, one, I just personally am opposed to a regressive tax system. But two, it's built on assumptions that have been shown over and over again to be really bad, right? Over half of this bill is the estimated revenue from the cigarette tax, which is notoriously unreliable. Now, is it going to hurt a lot of people that this didn't pass? Yes. Do I wish that it had passed? Me personally, yeah, I wish it had passed.
So this is the thing, right? And this is where
I'm just saying, if people who say that they can't vote for it because it's a horrible bill, I can't look at them and be like, no, it's a great bill.
Right. It's not great, but it's the best we've got, and so let's do.
And we need it, right? We have services that desperately need them. Like this 92-year-old woman that called her representative today who's worried she's going to be homeless. Now, what the question that I have now that I don't know the answer, and if either one of our listeners have the answer and can message us on and let us. Someone just got an email. So if either one of our listeners have the answer and can let us know, one of the big things that Representative Calvi talked about in his debate today was that he was trying to make the point that cuts are completely unnecessary because there's plenty of cash available.
Oh, okay. I'm going to go off on this
to fill this hole. And so, okay, so if you,
I know
so
I'm not the
like
only one that was. This is why I was angry with Representative Calvi today. We disagree on likely everything. He probably likes Rocky Road ice cream or something I don't like, but is
marshmallows and ice cream. Let's get serious.
That's terrible. Why would you do that?
I know, right?
All right.
Ruin a good thing like ice cream by putting marshmallows in it?
Right. No. It's unnatural.
GTFO.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
I'm too old for these acronyms, Scott. So here's the exception I take with Representative Calvi's position on revolving funds. So he said several times during his debate, and he said it the other day in JCAB, that there's $1.3 billion sitting in revolving funds that he thinks the legislature should raid and pull the money out. And the issue with that is that it's a raid. They're not Vikings. This money goes into those revolving funds. I'm using air quotes. Revolving funds are basically the bank accounts for tons of state agencies and boards. The Professional Counselor Licensing Board has a revolving fund. That's because when I pay my licensure fees, it goes into that fund. That's their account. It's a state account. And
medical board is the same way.
Medical board's the same way. It's like a holding place for your money that you're going to spend on something later. And when they appropriate money to agencies, a lot of it goes into revolving funds. It doesn't mean it's just cash sitting around. It means they just haven't spent it yet, and they're going to. For example, and I'll get off my soapbox here.
No. Stay on the soapbox.
Last year in 2016, when I first started Let's Fix This, and we started paying attention to all this shui, that the city of Hugo, Oklahoma, had, so their water system, someone had, either they had a bad treatment center or someone had like poisoned their water, basically. Like brown bathtub water with kids in it. Got Aaron Brockovich, like the actual Aaron Brockovich, not Julia Roberts, picked up the story because this company was contaminating groundwater that was going into people's drinking water. And so the city of Hugo sued them. They won the lawsuit. They settled. So I guess maybe they settled. They didn't win. Anyway, they got a bunch of money. They had money sitting in an account, in a revolving fund that they were going to use. That was their down payment on a brand new water treatment center for the town of Hugo because they had brown doo-doo water. Or I don't what it was.
You can say shit. I've said it several times already.
I know, but doo-doo water is funnier, and I don't know what it was contaminated with. But regardless, they were going to build a new treatment center for their water, and then last year the state legislature snatched all the money out of the revolving funds, including that like $1 million or whatever it was for Hugo, so they couldn't build their water treatment center. That's not money you can take, man. So the fact that they took Hugo's money meant that Hugo couldn't build this water treatment center, which they needed. And so I haven't followed up to find out where they're at now, but definitely kind of left them in the lurch. I know that the discussion of what money they were going to take wasn't across the board. They weren't going to snatch all 1.3 billion of it. They recognized there was some they should keep and leave there, but still, I just think there needs to be some due diligence in an emergency, in the right situation, it's possible. And I'm willing to bet there's probably 50, so 1.3 billion is essentially 1,300 million, right? Just to rephrase it.
Right.
Out of 1,300, there's probably 50 or 70, maybe even 100 million that could be reclaimed and not hurt those agencies.
Right. But again, and this comes back to the point that was made several times during debate today, both today and at JCAB. The state of Oklahoma, we're not in the budgetary position that we're in because cigarettes are too cheap or because gas is too cheap, right? And we're not in this position because the medical board or the counseling professionals board or the city of Hugo is not stewarding their funds correctly, right? And I don't think that it's fair for the state of Oklahoma to say, okay, we've got this huge hole. We're going to go snatch money from folks who have a better balanced bank account than we do, and we're going to use that to fill our coffers just because we can. Like I said, I started this out by saying I don't have as much familiarity with the revolving funds issue that Representative Calley was talking about as you do, but my understanding of it mirrors just what you're saying. And then this idea that we heard today, again, specifically, I'm not trying to harp on Representative Calvi. If he wants to come on the pod and talk about this with us, that would be.
He doesn't.
I'm sure he doesn't. But if he does, if he would like to come on the pod and talk and detail the corruption that he's talking about, I would love to learn more about that. But one of the things he went off about today was that the Oklahoma state government is just full of corruption. And if you just eliminated all the corruption, this budget hole wouldn't exist. And I don't see any evidence that that's true.
He terms out next year. I've heard that he's planning to run for some other state office, like a corporation commission position, and that he's got aspirations of the federal level. So we've got some time. So.
He said drain the swamp at least 6 times today during debate, so I assume he's wanting a appointment in the Trump administration, but I don't know.
He's been in the state legislature for 11 years, and he's talking about drain the swamp. Also, that goes back to a previous discussion. Anyway, I'm going to get off my Calvi soapbox. I don't normally call out members of the legislature. There are many, many very good public servants. They don't get paid a whole lot. This is a tough job. They got to make tough decisions.
And I think it bears, I was, cursing both in my head and out loud watching my Twitter feed today, seeing that the bill wasn't going to pass. And I really felt like it needed to, because I think it's going to hurt a lot of people that it didn't. But I think that this was a very hard vote. I think this was a hard vote for a lot of people. I think it's easy. It is easy for me. It's easy for me to sit on the outside, not having the pressure of holding elected office, and say, well, obviously this is the right thing to do. And I think this is a theme that we come back to frequently on the podcast, right? That it's really easy to armchair quarterback this kind of stuff. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's really easy to say, do the right thing, and the right thing is X, Y, and Z. But I think for people that actually hold the office, it's not always as clear what the right thing is. And I think that there were a lot of members of the legislature that took really, really hard votes today, both for and against the measure.
So I do want to point out something that Floor Leader Eccles, or Majority Leader, whatever his title is now.
Yeah. I think he's floor leader, right?
I think he's the Majority Leader, not Floor Leader. Anyway,
I can't keep track.
Sorry, John. So I was
Please still come on the pod.
Yes, I was talking with I think it was Floor. We'll just say Leader Eccles earlier this evening, and we'd hoped to have him on the pod tonight. And he said, I'm pretty down in the dumps at the moment. I don't know if I'd be a great guest. Let me do it again when I'm back to myself. And I want to publicly say, I have hassled Representative Eccles since the spring, trying to get him to hear the gross production tax issue. I thought, and it may have been a different vote today if these had been heard individually, but I've been saying, listen, you've got to at least put it for a vote. He said it wouldn't pass. And I said, it might not. But you've got to try.
Let's get it on record.
We, the people, want to know who's voting up or down on this deal. And I get that it's different when it's a combination than it is when it's individual bills, but it goes both ways. And so I told him on text, and I said it earlier on Facebook as well, I do appreciate that this bill finally went for a vote. I don't know that they had much of a choice, but there it is. They voted on it anyway. So that's something. Also, secondly, Governor Fallon, had a press conference.
Oh, Jesus.
Everyone did. Everyone had a press conference. The Dems had already scheduled theirs before they even had debated the bill. And so her statement came out this evening as well. And in something that Eccles said, and something that Governor Fallon said a couple of times, that they
They don't think it's dead. Is that what you're going to say?
They don't think it's entirely dead. And
so they could vote on this again.
As a result, worst-case scenarios could become a reality for several agencies that are being forced to cut crucial services if the pending revote fails. And so I'm interested. So I think, as we kind of start the winding down process here, that there is the chance. So kind of what happens next, right? Well, they could revote on this. They could inject this language into a different bill and vote again.
Yeah. So they could vote. They could vote on this bill again. They could. One thing that I know Leader Eccles put out there was to potentially vote on these things as individual measures, right? So, also just full disclosure, I said measure earlier because if you listen, like if you go to the Capitol and listen to debate in person, or you like watch the live feed, the gentleman that sits in the speaker's chair when the speaker's not there, which is all the time, he like talks about these bills and then he says measure, but he doesn't say measure, he says measure, and it drives me a little bit up the wall because it's not measure, it's measure.
One of those coastal elites.
I mean, I've never lived on the I have literally spent my entire life within 25 minutes of this spot, and we're recording at 23rd and Classen. So, I mean, maybe I am a coastal elite. I don't know, but
yeah. So hey, Joe Dorman he just said the bill was held on reconsideration for up to 3 legislative days,
so they could hear it again before Friday.
Right, and even legislative days aren't necessarily calendar days; those are just days they go into session. So if the House doesn't go into session again until next Monday, that's the first legislative day. So they've got 3 days they gavel in that they could hear it again.
Oh, so we could sit for the next 5 days waiting if they're going to do anything.
God, yes.
Twitter's going to be so much fun.
I'm so exhausted, and I think they all are too.
Oh, that's a 100% fact.
So this really all needs to be done by December 1st, because that's when they've got to roll out cuts.
Yeah, and so December 1st. The other thing is, so we've talked about that revenue measures can't start actually collecting revenue until 90 days after they've been signed by the governor. But there's also something about having to start at the beginning of the month. So like if they pass today, they can start March 1st. But if they don't pass it by the end of November, I think November like 28th, 29th, then it becomes April 1st. Like there's this window in which they can pass stuff and still start collecting revenue on the 1st of March. And we don't want to let that window pass.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And again, this gets into fairly arcane rules about how government works that you only know if you've worked in and around government for some time. This gets to the issue of term limits, and that sometimes folks who may be new to the legislative process don't fully understand the implications of waiting or pushing or taking more time to address some of these things.
Right. The other thing besides just term limits is what we mentioned earlier, State Question 640. And I really think today, Scott kind of, his eyes flutter back in his head. I think today...
If we're going to talk about 640, we're going to have to open a whole other bottle of whiskey.
Well, and so this is where I thought we might start the episode, and maybe this is where we ended, is that... So we discussed this several episodes ago, but State Question 640 is the legislation that was passed in 1992 that requires all revenue measures to pass both chambers with a 75% majority. So in the House of Representatives, which has 101 members, that means they have to get 76 votes in order for it to pass.
Which by the way, like, I'm getting agitated now that you're talking about this. Like, we've been talking the whole episode about how the measure failed. It didn't actually fail, right? So this bill passed the House of Representatives with 72% voting in favor.
Right.
In literally every other circumstance, literally, not hashtag literally, not air quotes literally, actual literally every other circumstance, that's enough. That's enough to override a veto. It's enough to sustain a veto. It's enough to pass any other bill. The only thing in Oklahoma that a 72% I vote threshold is not sufficient to do is raise taxes. And that's because of State Question 640, passed in 1992. And for those playing the home game, when is the last time the Oklahoma State Legislature passed a tax increase?
1994?
90.
90. Oh, before 640. Okay, I thought they did it once before, but
I thought it was maybe it was 94. It's been a long friggin' time.
I've only paid attention for the last year. So you said exactly what I was going to say. Is that State Question 640 passed in 92 has defined our ability to raise taxes, and I get it. At the beginning, it was an easy sell, right? Like the bill made it more difficult for the legislator to raise our taxes. Everyone supports that. Most people don't want the government to easily raise your taxes. However, they made it like too difficult, right? They could have just bumped it up to a 2/3 majority, which is like 67 votes, like most difficult things. But they made it 75%, which is a really difficult threshold because then it allows just a handful of, like 24 legislators to control whether or not you can pass something. As we saw today, it was a landslide. It was a landslide that
literally any other circumstance. Okay, if you talk about like a presidential election, right? If you had a presidential election where one person got 72% of the vote,
right, they're clearly the winner.
Like I don't know. I have no idea when the last time that happened.
Kennedy, maybe.
I mean, maybe
he won with less than 70, I think, but he won a really commanding victory.
I mean, it might be. I think. Are you talking popular vote or electoral college? Because if it's electoral college, I think the last time it happened,
Roosevelt.
Reagan?
So FDR won with 98% of the electoral votes. Whoa!
Oh, that's dictator level numbers, right? That's like Stalin level numbers.
That was one of his 4 terms. He was a good guy. Reagan won the most electoral votes of any president in history. So Roosevelt won 98%, 98.5%, not the only lopsided one. Reagan won with 97, again, 97.6, 98%.
Electoral votes or popular vote?
Electoral votes. This is all that whatever website I found here is all electoral votes.
Well, I mean, Barack Obama. I don't know that Barack Obama ever got. I don't remember his popular vote percentage off the top of my head, but I don't think he ever was over 55.
Yeah, I mean, even Bill Clinton, when he beat Bob Dole, got 379 versus 159. Gosh, Nixon won pretty handily too. I forgot about that.
But anyway, all that to say, getting 72% of members to vote in favor of something, like that's like, confirming Secretary of the Interior type numbers, right? Like, that's a huge margin. But in Oklahoma, it's not good enough for a tax increase.
Mm-hmm. Right. So that's the deal, is that this is really getting in the way. And so I know last session, Representative Monroe Nichols ran a bill to try to get this overturned, and it was not even heard, which is kind of nuts that they wouldn't even hear it. I mean, I get why, but I disagree. And so, the speaker has identified this as being one of the issues. So like right now on Twitter, this is a discussion. And I think people are starting to realize, like, you know what, like, we don't want to make it easy to raise taxes on both sides of the aisle. No one wants to make it easy, but we don't want to make it impossible. And that's where it is.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Because State Question 640 was a constitutional amendment, it would have to go back to a vote of the people to be repealed, right?
Right.
The legislature cannot undo 640.
No, they could pass a bill that would send it, like a referendum that would send it to the ballot, which is what they did with some of the ballot measures last year. So I really think 2018 might shape up to be another state question ballot initiative heavy ballot, which could be interesting. Like, there could be some really huge changes.
Right, we've got the 7% GPT from OEPA.
Right, provided they get the signatures.
Right. We've got open primaries potentially. We've got nonpartisan redistricting commission potentially.
Right.
Man, repeal of 640. Those are 4. I mean,
this
if
would
all
change.
If all 4, and then medical marijuana, as always.
Right.
If we've got all 5 of those on the ballot in 2018, that would be
a whole new world.
Okay, I think that's just
our recording stopped earlier when we discussed Broadway shows.
We had like a 10-minute discussion on my love of Broadway and propensity for crying easily, and you guys missed all of it.
Stupid technology. Has Aladdin been on Broadway? Is that a Broadway thing?
Are you seriously asking me this question right now?
Yep.
Yes.
We watched the Tonys together. You know how little I know about.
Okay, Aladdin has been on Broadway for a number of years.
Yeah. Okay.
The gentleman who plays the genie has won a Tony for his performance.
Great.
Yeah, it is. It is great.
I'm sure it is. I really like
Andrew. It is fantastic, actually.
Listen, you know that I like these things. I'm just not up on it as much as some others.
For those those playing the home game, Broadway musicals are one of my absolute favorite things. We were talking about movies we'd seen in the theater randomly, and I mentioned to Andy the last 3 movies I've seen in the theater were in order. So I saw La La Land, which I enjoyed, but actually had mixed feelings about. Overall,
it was entertaining.
Here's my deal with La La Land. Okay, is it a good movie? Yes. Do I love the story? Yes. Do I love the soundtrack? Yes. I love the production. I love the cinematography. But if you're going to write a musical for the screen and you want an old school 1950s style kind of Broadway musical, but instead of on stage, on film, why do you hire Emma Stone? Okay.
Don't you dare.
What?
I really like her.
I like her too, but the fact that I like her doesn't mean that she can sing.
Well, no, but as everyone just heard, I can't sing either.
Yes, but no one is hiring you to play the lead in a musical.
That's true. I'm severely underpaid.
Jesus. Okay. But no, I had issues. Like there are so many fantastic actors out there who have monster voices, and I don't understand why you wouldn't pick someone like that. Like why you wouldn't cast someone like that for that role. So anyway, I saw La La Land. And then I saw prior to that Beauty and the Beast, which Andy apparently didn't even know was now a live action feature. If you haven't seen it, you should go see it.
Yeah, I did. I just didn't see it.
Which is also, I mean, I don't know. You didn't know, you didn't see it. It's the same.
No, those are different things. I know that Russia is a country. I've never seen it in person.
If you've not seen the live action Beauty and the Beast, you absolutely should. Prior to that, the last movie I saw in the theater was Into the Woods. So again, the theme would be I go to the movies when there are good musicals.
That's good.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone's their thing. The last movie I don't know what the last movie was I saw. Maybe Star Wars? No, I've seen one since then.
Rogue One or...
Yeah, all the new Star Wars. Except not episode 1, 2, and 3. Those were terrible. But the 7, 8, 9, whatever we're on now.
1, 2, and 3, they did make me sad.
I didn't see 3. It was just too much. But I really haven't gone to the theater much because
you're always at the Capitol.
Well, no, but at the Museum of Art, I've seen a number of films there. Like I'm Not Negro was a great one, and then.
So we saw this weekend. Actually, we went to the Museum of Art and we saw Loving Vincent.
Oh dang it! We were gonna go,
dude. It's so good. It is so.
Shoot! Don't say
that. It is so good.
Because they're not. It's not. It's done now. We were.
Yeah, it's done. Well, just a quick plug. The next show that's going to be on at the Oklahoma City MOA Museum of Art, Human Flow, looks incredible.
What's it about?
So based on I've seen the trailer, but I've not read the synopsis. But based on the trailer, it's refugees. So it's like looking at refugees from ISIS, refugees from several of the African nations that are in kind of flux in terms of lots of the migrants that are kind of truly fantastic. I think Ashley and I are going to go see it next week.
Yeah, where are we?
Where are we? We are still on the precipice of devastating cuts to a number of agencies that care for some of the most vulnerable citizens in our state. So
what do you think is going to happen next, Scott?
I mean, from what Eccles is saying and what Governor Fallon is saying, I think this may come back for a vote.
Do you think they can come up with those 5 votes?
So I think they can. And here's
my deal. There's only 26 people or whatever left.
Right.
The 22 of them or so are in that platform caucus. The chances of getting them to flip is tiny, and I don't think that like Corey Williams and Proctor and some of those will flip either. Is that it? I mean, I really
hear
think
you.
71 might be the top.
It may be, but I also think this is really getting into some inside baseball. But so I think what happened, and you and I talked about this before the pod came on, what we have heard repeatedly throughout session, a special session rather, Speaker McCall has said if the Dems would deliver 75% of their caucus, he would deliver 75% of his. The vote opened today, and unexpectedly, the Democratic caucus threw 82% of their votes up on the board. Like, immediately. They had 23 of their 28 member caucus in favor of the measure. And I don't know that the House leadership expected that. I don't think that they were prepared for that. And quite frankly, I'm not sure that in advance of today's vote, one, because of how rapidly it came about, given that the Senate passed this measure yesterday, and two, because they didn't think that the Dems had the votes, I don't know how aggressively they whipped this. So I think give it a couple of days, give them a chance to talk, maybe give the Democratic caucus a chance to talk amongst themselves. Maybe they talk to each other. I think there's a legitimate chance they can find 5 votes to pass this. I'm not. I mean, it's not a slam dunk by any means, but I think I have to believe that there's a chance.
So you're telling me there's a chance?
Indeed, I'm invoking the cable guy that there could be a chance.
Dumb and Dumber.
Oh,
dost thou not know their Jim Carrey history?
You're right. And I even knew Bumblebee Tuna when you.
That was a good one too. That was Ace Ventura 2.
I watched that last week.
I like that we've devolved into Broadway and Ace Ventura references from 20 or 30 years ago.
So anyway, I'll just say I think the measure comes back for another vote. I think that it could pass. I'm not saying it will, but I think it could. The other thing is there's the measures that the House has passed, right? That the Senate has not heard, and no matter what happens with House Bill 1054X, right? No matter what happens with 1054, the Senate needs to take those measures up and pass them.
Ooh, so that's a debate. Is that not a debate, but an interesting point is that if the Senate passes those cash and cuts bills and the House passes the big revenue bill, even if both chambers passed all of those bills, we still wouldn't really. That would fill the hole for this year,
right,
and put us on better footing for next year,
right, but not great.
But we would still be way below what we were like a decade ago,
right?
And so there's this argument that like our government needs to be smaller, and I get that, and there's certainly some waste out there. There's waste in every business, in every organization, in every state agency, and I disagree that or I don't disagree. I think that there are ways that we could run more efficiently. Like that's kind of one of my bailiwicks, but.
Did you just throw out bailiwick?
It's a good word.
It's a great word.
Also, it's funny to me because it's the name of a character on Sophia the First, which a TV show for kids that my daughter loves, kind of cartoon.
Isn't it also a character in David Copperfield?
I have no idea.
You know David Copperfield?
I've heard about it. I've not read it.
Novel, Charles Dickens.
Yes.
Circa 1860, 1870.
I didn't always read all my stuff in school. In high school.
Were you a Cliff Notes guy?
No, I just didn't read.
You didn't read the Cliff Notes.
I skimmed it and I got an A, but that was. I put my energy towards classes that I cared about, and that was not one of them.
You didn't care about English literature?
No, I didn't. I do now. I just didn't when I was 16. Back then, I cared about architecture and computer-aided design and AutoCAD mostly. The Beastie Boys. Working at Subway.
Beastie Boys. Okay.
Yeah. Fixing up my 84 Pontiac Bonneville.
Oh, nice. Nice. Anyway, continue. Not your bailiwick.
Extra sound effects for the episode. All right, so that brings us to the end of the episode, whether we need it or not. Reminder, you can connect with us on Twitter and Instagram. We are at Let's Fix This OK. Scott is at SC Melson on Twitter, and I am at Andy OKC. You can also like our Facebook page at facebook.com/Let's Fix This OK. Our website is letsfixthisok.org. And On there, you can sign up for our newsletter, read our blog, find details about upcoming events, including the West Wing Weekly Watch Party, which will be tomorrow.
Shibboleth.
Will likely be before you actually listen to this episode, depending on when I get it edited. Anyway, our podcast is edited and produced by Scott and me, and Let's Pod This is a member of the Mostly Harmless Media Network. Our theme music is provided by the local band, our friends and yours, the Sugar Free All-Stars. As a reminder, Let's Fix This is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization who strives to educate and equip all Oklahomans to engage with their government. We encourage you to get involved in any way you can. And remember, decisions are made
by those who show up.